Welcome back to another reading of Ladies and Cowboys by me, Akili Rose. Today we are going to be looking at Chapter 4, which is going to be the second to last chapter that I will be reading out loud, unless there is a demand for me to read the entire book, which might or might not be doable. We'll see what I have time for. This is just a reminder that this is an unprofessional recording. This is just something I'm doing in my free time for you guys, so you can decide if you're interested in reading my book or not. Also, this is an older version of the book. There are several edits and small changes that have been made to the version that you will be receiving should you buy the actual book. Alright, well, let's get right into it. Chapter 4, Bounty Hunter. Killian got to his feet and hunted down the horses that had been brought by the men he just killed. I did not move, my mind replaying the scenes from the past day over and over. I was trapped in an endless, worsening loop of growing anxieties and fears. Suddenly, and unexpectedly, I felt a hand land on my shoulder. At the touch, I startled back to myself and yanked violently away from whoever had come to me with a shout. I threw myself into the dirt, twisting my body to see my new assailant. We both froze. The man in the darkness stared at me calmly while I cowered from him until I realized it was Killian returning. Despite the heat of the summer night, I shivered before I forced myself to relax. I started to get up, so Killian moved in to offer me a hand. "I'll try to keep them away from you, but we'll have guests with us in camp," Killian warned me once I stood shakily. The only guests he could be talking about were the ones who were so soundly asleep they would never wake up. "Why?" I spat out. Why did he need to bring them with us? Why did I have to go too? There were many more whys, but I could only get that one word out. "It's my job. I'm a bounty hunter," Killian replied simply. He then left to bring the horses over and led me back to the camp. I made sure not to look at the limp forms slung over the saddles of the two horses Killian brought with us. I kept my focus first on my feet, and then, when I could see it, the dimming campfire that I had abandoned. Latana stood near where we came from and looked over the new horses. She called to them, her ears flattening against her head in challenge. "Go to the fire," Killian instructed, before he took his burden to the opposite end of the camp. I did not dare watch him work, so I did as I was told. My stomach growled. How I could have any sort of appetite at this point, I didn't know. I did my best to ignore it by pulling out the water canteen Killian had given me and taking a few small sips from it. I was not sure how long we had before we would be near fresh water, so I only drank enough to push down the hunger. It was as I sat there quietly that I started to feel my many bruises and cuts from everything that had happened. There were some bruises on my back from when I had landed on the riverbed. The throbbing bump on the back of my head where I'd been hit, rope burns on my wrists and ankles as well. On top of those, I could feel countless other minor injuries and aches from God only knew what. I was sore and tired and scared. Killian approached me shortly after. He moved purposely and noisily, which was completely different from how I had come to know him. I could not help but wonder if he was trying to make me feel more comfortable, or maybe he was just as tired as I was. He sat on the opposite side of the fire and let out a long sigh. "You need to try and rest. Use my bedroll. We'll need to make it to Bull's Reach as soon as possible." I considered refusing, but just the idea of lying down and closing my eyes to get rid of the awful day sounded good. Maybe I would not sleep, but I would not have to deal with anything else at least for a few hours. I nodded miserably at him and struggled into the rough cloth bedding. I could feel Killian's eyes on me from across the fire, but despite everything, it was comforting to know I was being watched over. The next morning brought a heavy headache and nausea. Killian woke me up simply by moving around the campsite and packing up. I had dozed, but a full sleep was not possible for me. I groggily sat up and glanced about our camp. The sky was just starting to color, the sun not even peeking over the horizon yet. I squirmed out of the bedroll to crouch in front of the embers of the fire. Killian paused what he was doing to glance over before continuing his work. He eventually came over with a bowl of some sort of soupy slop and passed it to me. "Even if you don't feel like it, eat." He moved over to check on the two new horses. I stared at the unappetizing-looking food, but then obediently brought the lip of the bowl to my mouth and sipped at its contents. Although my stomach protested, I forced the strange bland food down until the bowl was basically empty. Killian had taken the bedroll while I ate, and the camp was cleaned up. Unlike last night, when he was moving around noisily, the only sound he made now was tacking up the horses. "You'll ride Latana with me like yesterday." I nodded. The other choices were likely to ride Latana alone, or to ride with one of the dead. Neither seemed like an ideal option for me. Killian helped me up onto Latana as he had before, and we set out. The two horses with the heavy burden of several dead men were led behind us using the same rope Killian had saved me with. A throbbing headache took up the entirety of my ability to think. I soon found myself wearily leaning against Killian, my head drooping down. He did not protest at all. Instead, he cautiously wrapped an arm around my waist to keep me in place. We rode for a long time. I was in too much of a daze to be able to tell, but as the sun passed overhead, I started to hear sounds of civilization. I finally stirred and looked up to see a distant town of wooden buildings. A trio of riders headed our way, and I swiftly straightened. Killian's arm tightened around me for a moment before he relaxed again. "What have you brought us this time, Sinclair?" one of the riders called cheerily as he peeked down at me. Killian gave no response. Instead, he kicked Latana into a faster walk, much to the trio's amusement. The riders continued on their way, making gruesome comments about the dead men on the horses behind us. The busy little town seemed to come to a standstill as Killian and I rode in. Eyes and rumors followed us like chicks flocking to their hens. I pulled my silly hat down low over my eyes as I listened to strong southern accents and old-sounding words fill the air. We came to a stop in front of a stone square building that proudly proclaimed itself as a jail on a wooden sign. Killian got off but stopped me when I tried to stiffly follow. Before he could speak, the jailhouse door burst open and a tall, intimidating man sauntered out, his hands on his gun belt. "Sheriff?" Killian greeted stonily. "Well, well, if it ain't Killian. You brought me Frankie and his boys, I see. 'Bout time someone did something about that nasty crook," the sheriff cheerily welcomed. The stranger lifted his attention to me and I could not help but duck my head again. He chuckled softly before he leaped down the stairs. "What brings you down here? Thought I'd seen the last of yez a year ago after the whole thing with the Starry Skies Trading Company." "I'm after a lead." "Must be big to bring you back down here. You saved yourself a damsel too, huh? Not your usual style," the sheriff muttered as he shifted about trying to get a good look at my face. "Pretty little thing too. Too pretty for these parts." "Enough! Give me my money," Killian said shortly. The sheriff harumphed before he reached into his pocket to retrieve a wad of cash. He started to count it out before he paused and held some bills back. "The bounty was $50 each if alive. I'll give you 105. Sound good?" I glanced over to Killian to see his reaction, but he kept his face calm and cold. He remained silent. The sheriff sighed before he re-added another bill. The lawman handed the lot over to the bounty hunter. 110 is best I can do. Take it and get that woman out of the sun. She looks like she's about to faint at the sight of us beasts," the sheriff scolded. Killian took the cash and counted it before he nodded. "I'll see you later, Killian. You take care of that girl now. Don't let those louts near her. They'll rip her apart." "I'll be back," was Killian's only reply as he pulled the reins over Latana's head and started to lead her away. I glanced back over my shoulder at the sheriff, who beamed and waved in a friendly manner. If I had been anywhere else, I might have returned that wave. Instead, I swiftly turned to facing the front of the horse. I grabbed the saddle horn nervously. "Ignore him. You'll be fine." His attempts at comforting me were kind, but not entirely effective. The people in this place were strange, and I could only imagine I must have appeared even stranger to them. These people had skin tanned from hard and long hours out in the sun. Their hair was messy and wild, bodies unbathed. All their clothes looked faded and handmade. It was as if I had been dumped into the set of some raunchy Western movie. My reality of this not being in my own time, or possibly even world, was settling in more and more with each person I looked at. Killian led Latana to a building that was vaguely nicer and larger than the others. It had a porch and a second story. The sign at the top of it proclaimed proudly that it was a saloon. Fast-paced piano music drifted out onto the streets. There was a strong stench of alcohol and rambunctious drunken laughter assaulted my ears. All this made me fully aware of the kind of place Killian had brought me to. He stopped in front of the building. Seeing this, I knew this was our destination, so I slid gracelessly off of Latana without Killian's urging or help, as he hitched the horse to the porch railing. Killian turned to find me standing a little unbalanced beside his horse and raised an eyebrow at me. I frowned and looked away until he started to walk around the horse to enter the building. I obediently followed him inside. Even in the early evening, it was dark and smoky inside the building. I coughed uncomfortably, used to the anti-smoking laws of my era. The bartender took one look at the two of us and quickly grabbed 2 glasses. He poured a pair of drinks with the practiced ease of a man who thought he knew what people really wanted. Alcohol was the last thing on my mind, but since it had already been offered, I reached for the glass as soon as we made it to the bar. My companion watched me for a moment before he took his own drink, leaned against the bar, and downed it. As for my drink, I took a small sip of it and immediately decided this town's alcohol was not for me. Seeing my expression as I swiftly put the cup down and pushed it away, the bartender burst out laughing. "Not one for the drink, little miss?" the man teased lightly. His casual tone made me feel a little at ease, and I shook my head. "Killian, it's rare to see you with such fine company. You've got to treat her to a better place than this dump," the man cackled. Killian responded only by pulling my discarded drink toward himself and finishing off that as well. I watched him nervously, wondering what he would do if he got too drunk. The alcohol here was heavy and foul-tasting. I had no doubt in my mind that just a few sips could knock anyone down, let alone 2 glasses of it. Contrary to my thoughts, Killian did not appear at all affected, though he caught my nervous stares and shook his head when the bartender offered him a third. "Girl, you picked a good man to keep by your side. He'll keep you safe." "Killian can shoot a tick off a donkey's ass. There's few as good as him," the man assured me. I gave him a tight-lipped smile, not really sure how to reply. "Willie, we will need rooms for the night," Killian said quietly, his voice barely audible in the loudness of the saloon. "Unfortunately, we've only got one left. The Cody boys are in town right now. They're taking up every room available, both here and in the hotel. All we've got left is the corner room." "That's good enough." Killian slapped some of the money he'd just received from the sheriff down on the bar. Willie took it and counted the bills before he nodded. The man took a key off the wall behind him and passed it over. "It's already ready for you." Killian nodded and pulled away from the bar. He placed a gloved hand on my back and led me toward a set of steep wooden stairs. We ascended them to a second floor that was filled with empty tables and a few doors leading into what I could only assume to be tiny rooms. Killian led me to one in the back corner and opened it for me with the key. As I had feared, the room was absolutely minuscule. There was enough space for a bed, a trunk, a tiny table, and a stool. In one corner was a pot that, based on smell alone, I could only assume was a chamber pot. I stepped a little hesitantly inside before Killian coughed lightly. "You should stay here and rest. I'm going to go get supplies." He did not wait for any reply and vanished, shutting the door securely behind him. I stared at the door for a few minutes before I sat heavily on the wooden stool. There was a small window situated beside the stool. I put my head down on my arms and watched the sky outside. Darkness fell suddenly, and I found myself sitting up in the desert. There was a familiar rumble of fast-flowing water nearby, and I tried to get my bearings. I was back where it all started, sitting at the overflowing riverbed Killian had rescued me from. Water splashed down toward me, as if the arms of water were trying to carry me down. I got to my feet and searched around in a panic, looking for Killian or Latana, but no one was there. Beneath me, the sands at my feet started to shift and twist, flowing toward the raging waters. I tried to run, but there was a weird weight on my limbs, as if I had just woken up, or had been heavily drugged. I was being forced closer to the waters, the landscape folding up around me as the river rose. It was reaching for me. I could feel the cold spray of it on my face, and I opened my mouth to scream for help. That was Chapter 4 of Ladies and Cowboys by me, Akili Rose. Thanks for watching!